Right, so in this video I'm going to be doing a tactical breakdown of how United can improve their build-up phase. Just a quick disclaimer, this isn't me predicting what Ten Hag will do, this is just saying what I would do. So take this video as me analysing more my own philosophy and strategy, rather than me analysing Ten Hag's. Right, so on the tactics board here we can see that United are set up in what is a usual build-up shape, a 2-3-2-3, which with the aid of a ball-playing keeper with the passing range of Onana or Costa, essentially gives Ten Hag's side an extra player on the pitch during possession, turning the shape into what is really a 3-3-2-3. And most of the opposition sides that United face who do look to press high aren't going to go really aggressive man-to-man in the way that an Arsenal or Manchester City would, and so more often than not you're going to see the opposition lining up in more of a 4-2-3-1 with the wingers sitting quite narrow, keeping their defensive shape very horizontally compact. But before I go any further, with the new season approaching and new jerseys slowly being released, you can pick up some for yourself by checking out jerseyfifa.com. A link to the site will be left in my Instagram bio, which you can find in the description below. And alongside the new season's jerseys, they also have retro jerseys as well. And not just for the big English and Spanish sides like United, Real Madrid and Barcelona, but also shirts like the Italian jerseys from the 80s and 90s, and also some iconic names on the back as well. So you can check the link in my Instagram bio and use code ATLANTISFOOTBALL to get a discount as well. And in my opinion, the best way to look at the build-up phase is to essentially split your half into two. The defensive third and the middle third, and so the goal is to progress the ball out of the defensive third and into the middle third. And as you can see here in this 3-3-2-3 shape, it's a goalkeeper, the two centre backs, the full backs, and a deep single pivot in midfield, which will usually be Casemiro for United, who are situated in this zone. And so you do have the five deepest outfield players in the defensive third, and then the five forward players sitting in the middle third. And whilst the front five aren't involved in the build-up in terms of actually getting on the ball and looking to progress the ball forward, they still play very important roles to the overall build-up shape out of the defensive third. The two wide players in the front three, which in this example is Marcus Rashford from the left and Antony from the right, their role is to sit high and wide and essentially push the opposition's fullbacks backwards, whilst the centre forward in the front three is going to try to do the same with both centre backs, sitting between them and trying to stop either one pushing up and applying more pressure. And so the theory is, by trying to push the opposition's defensive line backwards as much as possible, you create more space between the lines of the opposition's defensive and midfield lines, and this is where the two central midfielders are what you would call 3/8 ahead of Casemiro, which in this example I've used Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount, assuming he is signed, come into play, with their job being trying to get away from their markers, which is going to be the opposition's central midfielders if they are man-to-man pressing, and looking to find space. And so these two, Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes, are essentially the outballs for the players in the defensive third, and so that's why you need players with great passing ability, particularly the goalkeeper. And also in the build-up phase you can essentially split both sides' shapes into two separate shapes, with United having a 5 against a 6 at the top of the pitch, and a 5v4 or a 6v4 if you count the keeper, which you would if it was Onana or Costa, but you wouldn't if it was De Gea, in the deeper part of the pitch in the defensive third. Now when United's keeper has a ball, the opposition obviously have to remain more central, but as the ball gets shifted over to the centre back and then to the full back, the opposition can shift across and look to compress the space, essentially looking to use a horizontally compact pressing shape, along with the right position intercut of passing lanes, to cut the pitch down into half. And the theory behind this is that if you make the pitch smaller, there's going to be less space for the opposition players when they receive the ball, making it easier for you to then press them and win the ball back high up the pitch. And this was a key element to Jurgen Klopp's gegenpressing back with Borussia Dortmund in the early 2010s, and what made them so effective. Now personally, my issue with using a 2-3 shape or a 3-3 shape in the build-up phase in the defensive third is that because you are only using one central midfielder, the deep single pivot, in that central position, the player in this role has to be exceptionally gifted in terms of receiving the ball under pressure, being press resistant enough to either swivel out of pressure and drive the play forward, or be able to play quick short passes under pressure and play their way out of the aggressive press. And as the elite sides around Europe and even just general Premier League sides are becoming better at pressing high up the pitch, with opposition managers having better tactical awareness of how to press teams like City, Arsenal and United when they play out from the back, as well as the attacking players also being a lot more tenacious and having better tactical understandings of where they should be. This means that you really need a player who's a specialist, a Rodri, a Busquets, someone of that ilk, who isn't just a sole defensive midfielder but also a player who's press resistant, And so while sides like Manchester City can use a player like Rodri in big games in this position and still play out of the press effectively, I think personally for United, Casemiro isn't this type of player. Now this isn't to say that Casemiro isn't a good player at all, it's just not his game. Yes, he is a fantastic passer when he's got the ball and he's got the play ahead of him, but in terms of receiving the ball with his back to goal, I don't think he's at the same level as players like Rodri or even a Frankie de Jong. But this doesn't mean that Ten Hag has to take Casemiro out of the side or even out of that position. And I think Roberto De Zerbi has set the blueprint for how to play out of the press effectively. And the way he does it is by dropping another central midfielder alongside the deep single pivot, creating a double pivot and a 2-4 or a 3-4 shape in the defensive third. Which means that if the opposition want to continue their man-to-man press, they're forced to push one of their central midfielders up into the defensive third, which consequently leaves one less opposition player in the middle third and creating more space for United further up the pitch. And so by using a 3-4 rather than a 3-3 in the defensive third, you now have an extra player on the edge of the box in central positions, which in my opinion doesn't just make it much easier to play out of an aggressive man-to-man press high up the pitch, but then also allows you to exploit the space higher up the pitch in the middle third. And this is why when you watch Brighton play, a lot of their attacks seem like counter-attacks because of how quickly they're able to transition the attack and the amount of space that there seems to be in central positions. But these, what I would refer to as quick transitioning attacks, aren't coming from Brighton turning the ball over and then looking to exploit the opposition space from their possession system before they can drop back into their compact defensive shape. Instead, these quick transitioning attacks are coming from Brighton's own build-up. And so now at this point we have moved from a 3-3-2-3 to a 3-4-1-3. And with your front three holding high positions, pinning the opposition's defensive line backwards, you can see the amount of space that gets created behind the opposition's front line press. And the way that I think is the best way to go about exploiting this, which is heavily influenced by De Zerbi, who I would probably say is my favourite manager. Well, I mean, obviously Ten Hag is at the moment, but if I be a bit more objective and take out the Manchester United equation, he's probably the manager, along with Pep Guardiola, who I look at as the main influences behind my own tactical ideas and tactical philosophy. And so as we see De Zerbi's Brighton do, I would have the most advanced midfielder of a three alongside the centre forward, both dropping into these central positions, creating a box shape in the centre of the pitch. And because at this point United would be playing with no centre forward or no recognised centre forward, if the opposition do want to maintain their man-to-man press, one of the centre backs is going to have to move out of the defensive line and follow the centre forward into a deeper position or a high position from the opposition's point of view. And the obvious benefit of this is that with the wingers holding high and wide positions, stretching the defensive line, you now have a three where there's a massive amount of space between the two fullbacks and the remaining centre backs. And especially with a wide player like Marcus Rashford, who excels at making those diagonal runs between the opposition's fullback and centre-back, alongside a goalkeeper like Costa or Onana, and a centre-back like Lisandro Martinez, who can ping those long balls and release Rashford in behind, and you have a potentially deadly combination. As the higher the opposition push up the pitch in order to make their press more aggressive, the more space there's going to be higher up the pitch for the likes of Rashford and Antony, and for Brighton, Solly March and Mitoma to make those runs in behind the back line. So that long pass from either the centre-backs or the goalkeeper, which is something that we see City do with Ederson quite a lot, is a fairly low probability ball, but it's a ball that can be played. But more often than not, United are going to have to play out with a series of short passes. And having a double pivot rather than just a single pivot on the edge of the box just really creates more passing angles, allowing you to play around the press a lot easier, and taking a lot of responsibility off the player who would be the single pivot. Also, another advantage of using a double pivot rather than a single pivot is that when you shift the ball across the box, obviously the opposition centre forward isn't going to be able to race across quickly in time, and so likely what's going to happen is one of these central midfielders is going to step out from his marker and look to pressurise the centre back on that side, while simultaneously trying to cut the passing lane into the player behind. And then to keep the press vertically compact, one of the opposition central midfielders can just push up onto the deep single pivot, cutting off United's options to play out whilst also applying pressure to the centre backs in their own box. However, when you're using a double pivot on the edge of the box, when the opposition do look to do this, even if the passing lane into one of your deeper central players is being cut off, because there's two players in that position, the likelihood is with the right movement and the sharpness of passes, there's always going to be a diagonal pass on, and so you can essentially have one of your double pivot just stay in the shadow of the player that's now cutting the passing lane. And as we see Brighton do, bounce a ball in ping pong fashion from one of the double pivot to the other. And with one of the double pivots sitting in the shadow of the player who's moved off of him to apply the pressure, United can essentially take both of the opposition's high central midfielders out of the game, allowing them to now play out of the defensive third and exploit the space ahead. If the opposition's central midfielders instead decide to hold a position on your double pivot, and it's the wingers who apply pressure to the centre backs, because you've now got two players on the edge of the box who can sit either side rather than one player who's got to move from side to side, you've always got the passing option of bouncing the ball from the centre out to the fullback, who should have a lot of space now that the winger who was marking him has pushed up and vacated that space on the flank, allowing the fullback to now carry the ball forward into space. If the opposition instead look to initiate a more aggressive press in United's defensive third, utilising more of a 3-1-4-2 shape which allows them to go man to man, particularly higher up the pitch as Manchester City do, then whilst it is going to be significantly harder to play out of the defensive third with more of the opposition players pushed higher up the pitch, this does mean that there's going to be more space in the middle third to exploit. And from here, what I would do is, rather than having one of the two central midfielders in the double pivot, look to push up and pull one of the opposition pressers out of their area. Instead, I would still instruct United to keep that 3-4 possession shape in the defensive third, as with the added aid of a ball-playing keeper, you still have an extra man. However, further up the pitch, we are going to change a few things in order to exploit the space in the middle third. And so what we're going to do is ask Antony and Rashford, the two wide attackers in the front three, to continue to hold those high and wide positions, not just pinning the opposition fullbacks backwards, stretching the opposition's defensive shape vertically, but also stretching the defensive line horizontally. The central midfielder in the middle third can then shift over slightly wider, vacating space on the other side to allow the centre forward to then drop off and create a box shape not just in the defensive third but also in the middle third. And because in this scenario the opposition have gone man to man high up the pitch, they are then forced to go man to man in the deeper areas. And so if they want to sustain this man to man press by moving on to both the centre forward and central midfielder, sitting in the middle third, creating that box shape, this is going to put the opposition's backline in a massive dilemma. If both centre backs move out and follow their men, then this creates a massive amount of space in the defensive line, and if Rashford or Antony can make a run goal side of their fullback, and someone in a deeper position like Lisandro Martinez or Andre Onana can play that long ball up the pitch, United could potentially set up a 1v1 opportunity with one long ball down the middle. If the opposition look to abandon their man-to-man press and have one of the centre-backs hold that position in the centre of the defence, then United have a free man in the middle third, and with the passing ability of players like Onana, Lisandro Martinez, and even the likes of Victor Lindelof, as well as Luke Shaw, they could potentially find an out ball by playing a lofted pass over the opposition's pressing line, or threading a low pass through to break the pressing line, allowing the centre-forward to receive the ball and turn in a significant amount of space. And this is why having a ball-playing keeper with the long passing range to play these sorts of passes to release runners in behind can be so important. And even if this type of pass isn't played, because the opposition know that with a keeper like Onana rather than De Gea, there's a high probability that he's going to be able to release the likes of Rashford and Antony in behind, their strategy to pressing United is going to be different. They're instead going to drop off and not leave that space, which in turn obviously means they can't push as high up the pitch and commit as many players to the press, making the overall press less vertically compact and also therefore less aggressive, giving United a better chance of playing out from the back. But obviously United aren't going to be trying these high risk long passes very often throughout a match, as whilst the probability of creating a big chance can seem high, the probability of there being a turnover and losing possession is also very high. And so the majority of time United are still going to be looking to play out via a series of short passes, and now with a ball playing keeper like Onana, this is going to significantly aid United in playing out of the pressure. And this can be a great example, as with this ball playing keeper you now have a 3v2 inside of the box, and so a simple pass across to the keeper when the opposition presser looks to move out can open up a passing lane into one of the double pivot, and if United can move the ball quickly via a series of one-touch short passes in that ping-pong fashion, which is what we see Zerbi's Brighton do, then this can also be a very good way of playing through the press and getting the ball into the free man, who is the centre forward who's dropped off into this space. And so a great way of thinking about the build-up is to break it down into the wide areas and the central areas, with the two fullbacks and wingers in the front three, holding wide positions in an attempt to stretch the opposition's pressing shape horizontally, and with the wingers also holding high positions on the flank, this is also going to stretch the opposition's pressing system vertically, maximising the amount of space between the lines for United to exploit. And if the opposition do look to move one of their fullbacks away from the wingers in an attempt to still assert that man-to-man press without leaving a massive amount of space in the centre of the defensive line, then this is where the wingers can look to drop deep and receive the ball in a deeper position on the flank. And so if anything, having an opposition press aggressively man-to-man can actually be what United want, especially with a keeper like Onana, rather than with De Gea, which is why we saw United struggle so much to play out of this sort of pressure last season.